So here we are on the third program in the series on the Prodigal Son. Rod Botsis and I are tracing the book written by Henri Nouwen, one of his last books before he died in 1996. Was it 96?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's one of the last books that he wrote, or at least that were published. And then we're tracing it, but it also tells a story, a well-known story from Luke 15, one of the best-known parables that Jesus told, one of the most retold parables, accessible parables, and the painting of Rembrandt, of course, in the 16th century. And Rod and I have had two conversations so far. The first one on the painting in general, the story in general, the characters in general, and then we honed in last week on the most famous of the characters in this story, the younger son. Now today we're going to do something a little bit different. But Rod, as I read this parable again and again, and I don't know how many times I've read it over almost 22 years of preaching now, and I'm sure you've read it many, many times over your 40-something years of preaching. There's always it's a parable that draws you in, doesn't it?
Over and over again, and it's never ever the same. Just this time it's this, that, next time it's something else. At the moment, the thing, while we're talking like this, studying, the thing that is confronting me quite strongly is the cost of freedom. Why I have had such a beautiful life, but at whose cost? In all sorts of ways. And that's just a little thought that keeps recurring in my life. That
may be one of the great themes of life, isn't it? Because if we take the Christian story, our spiritual self-understanding, it's freedom really from beginning to end. Freedom in the garden,
absolutely.
The abuse of freedom, the cost, to restore freedom on God's part for us. One of the great. Okay, so we're looking at this painting. It's a magnificent painting. I'm going to put it up just now. And this painting is something that Rembrandt painted, and it is in response to a biblical story. Rembrandt painted many biblical stories, many biblical characters. And I must tell you, one of the luxuries of my life has been to search for Rembrandt across the world, in the Louvre in Paris, in the Rijksmuseum in the Netherlands, in the States, in the Metropolitan Museum of Art and so on, and even in Australia they had a Rembrandt thing. So I always go looking for Rembrandt, and particularly his biblical stories, the paintings of his biblical stories. But
it's nice to know there's culture. It's nice to know there's culture in Australia.
Yes, and in Bellville too, So this painting of Rembrandt, and I want to put it up now because there's an elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is what? What is in this painting that's not in the parable?
Well, the older son and the mother, by the way, yes. Both of them pulled into the story.
That's right.
But clearly, it's the older son.
In the top corner, on the left-hand side, and in the middle, there are two women. But this character of the older son I call him an elephant in the room because Luke 15 does not have him in the room.
Yeah.
So why do you think Rembrandt would have taken that sort of artistic license to put him in the room?
Because the parable begs the question. We'll get to it later. It begs two questions. How was it all going to work out for them in the end, after the party, the next day? Yes. But also, just where is the older son in all this? I think Rembrandt beautifully pulls the family into the picture.
Yes.
And of course, the older son. And as I'm sure you'll help me get to this, the obvious red cloak for father and son,
yes,
making them one, in the same family. So
Yes.
I think he wants to do what Jesus has not done, but what Jesus may have done that's not recorded in Scripture, and that's fill out the picture a bit.
Right. And a painting is a little bit different from a story, isn't it? Because in a painting, to leave the older son out would have been to leave him out of the story, wouldn't it?
Well, if the painting, the medium allows you to decide what you want to do. I mean, when the story's told, you've got to just sit with the words that you are hearing. So he has a peculiar little secret. I have toyed with the idea at first, and I still sometimes run there, even though it's a woman, that actually the older son is this figure at the top left in the shadows, the ethereal one, that the person's there but is not there, you know. I love that Nouwen says perhaps this is the mother and pulls the whole lot in.
Yes.
But the picture lets you make up your own interpretation, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's lovely. It's lovely.
And includes the older son in the story. Now, why do we think? Because people often don't realize Rembrandt didn't leave a commentary. He didn't point out who was who.
Yeah.
He doesn't even identify the younger and the younger son and the father. Although when we look at the picture, we don't really seem to doubt those two characters. But why do we think this is in fact the older son standing on the right-hand side of the picture? And when you look at him, Rod, what do you see when you look at that character there?
Well, I see at least these four things: that he's there, but he's not included in the embrace. Now, you would think a family coming home, there would be a family embrace, there would be some joy. Well, there's absolutely nothing. Secondly, he's there, but he is not even inserting himself. There's no action from him. He stands immovable, immobile, a step above everybody else, and aloof. And sorry about that, George. And it's just terrible that he's there. The third thing for me is, what do I see? It's just so sad, because we know the outcome of the parable. There's not going to be joy for him.
Yes.
And also, I just find it absolutely intriguing that that he's there, but there is no connection whatsoever with the grace and the love that's going on. You know. So what it did for me was, again, ask this question a little bit about the freedom comment at the beginning, but how many role players have there been in my salvation history whose work I've not appreciated, whose history I've ignored, whose blessings I've trampled on, but benefited from? How many of these characters are there? And I have just been aloof to the whole thing. Just terrible.
Well, that's a great question, and it certainly is a searching question. I want to make a few remarks in response to what you've said about the older son. Just a couple of things that Nouwen brings out. Firstly, as you mentioned right at the start, the red cloak. There's only two people in this picture that have a red cloak on, and the one is the father, and there's this other man, and we assume that there's an attempt on the part of the artist to make this connection. But he's also got the beautiful gold going on underneath. This is a nobleman. He's a person of means. This family is a family of standing. They are they're not peasants.
Right down to the quality of the shoes.
Quite right. Beautiful shoes. There's a sort of a walking stick, or I don't know what that is. That a walking stick that he's holding there? And his clasped hands. Could be a sword, I don't know.
I think if he was a shepherd, it would be some sort of working stick, not a walking stick.
Right? Yes, that could very well be. He's got a beard like the father has. And despite his aloofness and despite the distance that the artist has put between what's going on in the center, although the center is off to the left, this embrace of father and younger son, there is a distance. He doesn't want to be part of it. He hasn't chosen to come closer in. He's at least in the room. And then he's got the clasped hands, which is another sign of, I'm not involved. The father's hands are open and on the shoulders, but his hands are closed. and
he
he's
doesn't want to
looking,
get his hands. He doesn't want to get his hands dirty, boy.
right,
It's not only just protecting himself. I am not getting involved with this.
right, right. So there is a hopefulness from the point of view that he's in the room, but there is still a great distance to travel for the intimacy. For him to be part of the intimacy.
Yeah.
And then he's looking down. Now, obviously, I think he's standing on a little stair or something. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But he seems to be looking down. Now, the one hopeful thing that Nouwen picks up is he says the same light that is there in the Father's hands and face also happens to be there in the oldest son's face, and even going down to his hands. So, yeah, there is possibility. I guess if you and I were in the room when the drama of salvation was being rolled out, people would also be looking for signs of hope. That eventually we would make our way to the center, and maybe if they saw the light in our face.
I think it's a lovely thought that you would say that this is a sign of hope. I have simply stopped one short of where you've gone, so thank you for extending this. That the light is simply the grace and the presence of the Spirit of God in this room.
Yes.
I want to shake the brother. I want to shout at the brother to get off the step, throw your stick away, take your coat off and put it around your brother. Yes. But this immovability of the figure just disturbs me so deeply,
Right. Now, the one last thing on this point that I want to raise is this issue, and it comes out of a commentary on the painting, that whenever Rembrandt and I guess his contemporaries as well would paint a gospel scene or a parable or a gospel story of one kind or another, there would always be in the picture a representative of the tax collectors and the sinners. And in this case, it's the younger son. But then also another group, the Pharisees and the scribes, which is a group that Jesus saved his strongest words for. His most forthright vocabulary was for them. And the point that Nouwen is making in one of the chapters on this is that this older brother standing there in the picture is a symbol of the tax collectors and the sinners. And if you think about that a little bit,
I think you mean the Pharisees.
The Pharisees and the scribes, right? Yeah. And if you think about it a little bit, and if you accept that, then you can also say that Jesus is holding out a hope that they also will come in and will be part of the great banquet that he has prepared for all of us. He doesn't seem to have a problem attracting the tax collectors and the sinners. He's surrounded by them. And in fact, they, his critics use them or his association with them to defame him. But he's also hoping that maybe the tax collectors and at least the scribes and the Pharisees will come closer.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you for extending grace to my mind on that, because I thought, okay, let me accept that this is both the elder brother but also representative of the Pharisees. But I don't think just that. For me, this is a kind of representation of everybody who stands aloof from the gospel, that in front of them is the evidence of God's grace in the world in all sorts of ways, but they don't engage. And it's the kind of beguiling lie of goodness that's more valuable than faith. And so I'm above it and aloof from it. But in fact, it is the very thing that Jesus is hard on them. Why would we need grace if goodness was possible? And of course, it's not possible because anybody picking up this picture with no knowledge of who these people were or even of Rembrandt would have to say, sure, all the light and warmth and loveliness, whatever's going on between this old man and this beggarly looking chap, that's beautiful. But the others standing on the side and still on the side are devoid of any emotion. So I thank you so much for saying there's hope I think there is a thumbnail sketch here of the kind of horror of unbelief.
Yes.
And why would you stay with a hard heart like that? I may talk about that just now, but yeah.
Okay, but let's just pause for a moment, Rod. And I need your help here, and I'm hoping that we can go back to the parable itself. So as you understand the parable, as you've studied it, as you've preached it over the years, the older son in the story refuses to come in. Why does he refuse to come in?
You've made me think this through, and I've tried to search my heart, and I've got to answer it pastorally. I am still, after 44 years, I am still shocked and undone by the hardness of people's hearts in the presence of God's grace and mercy in the world, and in their own lives. And it is a mystery to me. It's a deep sadness, but a mystery. Why is it that people have a hard heart? And I think Nouwen makes the point somewhere, which if he didn't make it, I don't know who did, but it riveted my attention, that I should not harden my heart against the hard-hearted ones.
Sure.
Which I think pastorally I'm inclined to be like that. I think I can be quite judgmental. So you will remember, if you haven't read it, of course you'll know about it, Jonathan Edwards' famous sermon of sinners in the hands of an angry God. And that was part of the Great Awakening. What an amazing phrase, that such a horrible sermon could be part of the awakening. But perhaps we are all petulant in the face, not of an angry God, but of a gracious and generous God. And that's what I see here. Why does he refuse to come in? He's simply got petulance and hard-heartedness in the face of grace. It undoes me.
Yeah, it does, and especially since, and the point that Nouwen makes, and I guess next week we'll really look into this carefully, is he says that the same grace that is rolled out to the younger son upon his return is very likely to have been the status quo for the older son as well.
Yeah.
Why would there's no evidence in the parable to suggest that the father treated the older son differently, but there is evidence to show that the older son felt like he was hard done by.
Yeah, but that's the absolute beauty of the way Jesus tells the story, is in fact he does not allow any evidence that the father has been anything but fair and equal in his love, even to the phrase, everything I had was yours, you were always with me. Those are such encompassing phrases. Yeah.
Look, the other important issue, I guess, every time we consider this passage, is to, in the context of that grace and taking it as a given that the father was gracious by nature to both elder and younger son. How did serving become slaving? All these years I've been slaving for you.
Okay, let me take a risk out of my personal life. Okay, where this conversation of ours goes in terms of viewership, I have no control over it. It's a bit anxious making, but anyway. So I've got a couple of penchants around cooking and plating things and making them look nice. I'm not sure you know that I set the table every night and try and make things look really lovely. I also am ridiculous in that I've written menus almost every night of my life for my family. Why do I do that? I don't know. But I remember one particular evening when the girls were still quite small and I'd worked very hard and supper was beautiful and the table was beautifully laid and I'd written a menu. And they sat down, I don't know whether it was schoolwork or whatever, but they were finished that meal and were gone in next to no time and no thank you. And I can still feel it, and I can still hear myself saying, why do I bother? Why do I bother to work so hard, slave for these people when they're not grateful? And George, as clear as a bell, I can hear the Spirit of God saying, Rod, you're doing this for yourself. Just enjoy that. It's okay to do it for yourself. Ever since then, I am free and full of joy to set the table nicely, to write the menu, because he's freed me to serve, not to slave.
Wow. Yeah, that's a major step. But what I'm hearing you say is it's a step that we have to take under God's guidance. It's an internal change, a transformation that needs to take place.
I think the slavery comes when we are expecting that our service has got to be acknowledged for what we think it is and in the way we want it to be explained or recognized, you know.
Yes.
So
I'm intrigued by the fact that and by the way, the culture, you know, of the Greco-Roman world, the father was a formidable character. Even in the Jewish, sort of cultural milieu, the father was in charge, and this is why you get.
Oh, that's the good old days, George.
Well, you and I both surrounded by women. We have, I'm sure, no, delusion about the fact about who's in charge. So the, in the Jewish world, in the Greco-Roman world, father was in charge. There was inheritance only after the father's death, and it was passed on to the older son, etc., etc. And the pater familias, the father of the family, in certain times before the New Testament era, had the power of life and death over his own children. But this father behaves differently. And but what surprises me about the dialogue of the older son is that he talks about all these years I've been slaving for you, when really he's been slaving, if he has been slaving, to make sure his inheritance is intact, because he stands to inherit.
Yes. Hence Jesus telling me, you were doing this for yourself, Rod. You see, you wanted some reward from your labor.
Yes.
So it was no longer serving. You were behaving like a slave.
Right.
Yeah.
And then to go on from there, so perhaps the parable has been misnamed. Now, of course, these biblical, these sections of the scripture were not named. That was later insertion. And I remember you teaching me when first I started to read the Bible from the front, from the lectern. I think I remember you saying, don't read the titles. You read the text. So if it goes on from one section to the next, you leave the title and you just read the verse, because that's the scripture. But is it not misnamed? Is this not the parable of the two lost sons?
Oh, most definitely. Absolutely. There's no reason whatsoever to refer to it as the lost son, even if Jesus uses that. But he uses other words as well. So there's lost and dead and found and alive. So you could use any word you like, but you've got to include both sons.
But the point is, you don't have to leave home to be lost. You can be lost right here at home.
And it's there, and people are all the time. Yeah.
Barbara Brown Taylor.
I have made a note here, George, for myself, that lost and dead are conditions of the soul. They're not localities of the body.
Okay.
So I can most definitely be at home, but lost.
Yes.
And dead.
Yeah. So just to throw a spanner in the works, and just as an aside, I remember once reading a chapter in one of Barbara Brown Taylor's books, and I enjoy her writing so very much, the Anglican priest, Barbara Brown Taylor, and she wrote about the spiritual practice of getting lost. She says there's something to be gained by going for a walk, in a city or in a forest or whatever, and getting lost. Because when you realize you lost, then all your senses jump into action, because now you have to try and recover. And when your senses jump into action, you're no longer dwelling through the world. You're actually moving with a purpose, and you see everything, and you're attuned to God's voice and all the rest of it. So the spiritual practice of being lost, I like that.
Well, but it's true in the story as well, you see, because he comes to his senses. when he realizes how lost he is.
Yes.
So, I mean, I've not traveled anywhere near like that you have, but if I do travel, I like to walk around the cities that I'm in. And I like simply to put aside the guidebook and walk, trying to remember where my way back, or I will stop and ask for help. And of course, you reach a point every now and again where you think, well, I really do need help here. I am lost.
Yes, yes. Yeah, good.
That's good.
Right now, as usual, there are stories within the story, and I'm fascinated again by the interplay of the texts, not only the parable of Luke 15 and Rembrandt's painting, but Rembrandt points out, and I want to actually read this section for us. Rembrandt points out that, at least Henri points out, that this is the older son is a significant point in Rembrandt's life journey. So he says, but the eldest, I keep saying older, the correct English is elder, but the elder son is also part of Rembrandt's life experience. And many modern biographers are in fact critical of the romantic version of his life. They stress that Rembrandt was much more subject to the demands of his sponsors and his need for money than is generally believed. That his subjects are often more the result of the prevailing fashions of his time than of his spiritual vision. That his failures have much more to do with his self-righteous and obnoxious character as with the lack of appreciation on the part of the milieu. And then on the next page, indeed, Rembrandt was known to often act selfishly, arrogantly, even vengefully. This is most vividly shown in the way he treated Geertjie Dirks, with whom he had been living for 6 years. He used Geertjie's brother, who had been given power of attorney by Geertjie herself, to collect testimony from neighbors against her so that she could be sent away to an insane asylum. The outcome was Geertjie's confinement in a mental institution. When the possibility later arose that she could be released, Rembrandt hired an agent to collect evidence against her to make certain she stayed locked up. So this kind of nasty, vindictive, and arrogant and bitter and twisted individual turns out to be a good representation of a stage of Rembrandt's life.
Yeah, it's a terrible story that you read, and again, in my naivety, I would look at the painting or other works of his or artists in general, and when they do such beautiful stuff, you think they've got to be beautiful people. And so I think when I do beautiful stuff, I've got to be a beautiful person, and I'm completely negating how horrible I can be given the chance. Just given a little chance, I can be absolutely terrible and behave in all sorts of the ways. In the lostness, the wretchedness of that, and in the hard-heartedness of the older brother. It's our story. It's really our story.
Well, I can tell you, since we're being vulnerable, that I can remember a day when I realized that I could use this tongue for good or for bad purposes.
Oh, absolutely.
And I thought that if I didn't use it for good purposes, I would end up ruining my life. And that was one of the very strong, senses of assurance that the ministry was a place where I could belong and, become.
I think that's absolutely beautiful. I've had mine's a slightly different history. At school, I was small and thin and weak, but I knew I could speak, and I could defend myself with my mouth. Of course, in destroying others, mocking them, and running away to fight another day. But what my tongue had done was terrible. And I still know there have been places in my life and in my ministry where I have destroyed something by the power of my mouth. Terrible thought. Terrible thought.
So that's Rembrandt's story. Rembrandt finds himself in the character of the older son, and Nouwen says that actually the face of the older son is also modeled on Rembrandt's own face. It's kind of a self-portrait in a way, but that's fine. And then, to my great surprise again, Henri says, I am the older son. Henri is the older son. And if I just read this section here, This is Henri, of course, talking about himself. He says, "The obedient and dutiful life of which I am proud or for which I am praised feels sometimes like a burden that it was laid on my shoulders and continues to oppress me, even when I have accepted it to such a degree that I cannot throw it off. I have no difficulty identifying with the elder son of the parable who complained, 'All these years I have slaved for you and never once disobeyed your orders, yet you never offered me so much as a kid for me to celebrate with my friends.' In this complaint, obedience and duty have become a burden, and a service has become a slavery." So Henri is the older son, but in a totally different way, not vengeful and arrogant and so on and bitter, but dutiful and perhaps a bit resentful.
Yeah. If you read now and without reading his history, you just fall in love with his works and what you think his character is. If you then pick up bits of his history without reading the fine print, you think, well, even his move to Daybreak, for example, was just so amazing that he would give up the career and go and look after, mentally handicapped people or whatever, challenged. And how lovely. But then you get to this where he talks so deeply about himself, so biographically. And I'm a bit like this with C.S. Lewis. I want to paint them into plastic saints. I want to think they're actually just. It's not true. It's not true. Don't do this to my. Don't do this to my heroes. but how much more then am I having to confront the same duality or darkness in my own life? I accept what he's saying there. I wonder what made him feel outside of the Father's love. And when he talks, we'll get to it later too, of finally telling his father, "I love you." And his father looks at him as if he doesn't quite understand why Henri is saying that. Because the father's obviously always loved him, So, oh dear.
Yeah, look, when I read him, and perhaps it's with a bit of sympathy, and I try to put myself in his shoes, and I think really what he's trying to say is that sometimes he feels the weight of this, of the choices that he's made, and perhaps even not so much the life choices in terms of career and so on, and the priesthood and celibacy and all that goes with it, but also the choices that he's put on himself, the sense of obligation, the sense of duty, and sometimes he feels the weight of that, and I can identify with it. And I'm an older child, an elder child. Probably the more difficult of the two children. My sister is very easy. She's very easy. She's very loving and so on, and I'm a bit more complicated. But I felt over the years a sense of responsibility, a sense of obligation, a sense of loyalty. And when I look at my own eldest child and many of the elder children that I know, I see a similar sense in them. I wonder if elder children have this sense of compliance and to be a pleaser in many ways. I don't know how you feel about it, because I know you're not the eldest child.
Yeah, I will just have to learn from you. While you've been talking, I've been thinking of people who sound like what you're sounding like, and I've alighted on one only to discover he's an only child. So that doesn't help. George, I can't identify because I'm clearly the third out of 4 children. Mm-hmm. And I've really found this quite hard. How do I identify with the older son? Yes, in the ministry, there have been times I thought I'd like to be irresponsible. I would like to have a day off. I'd like to be unknown. And there are these little joys for me of actually disappearing into places, shops and restaurants where I know I'm never going to be known. And I just love the anonymity. Can be who I am. Not that I'm naughty, but there we are. But my life has been just a blessed life. I mean, someone in the church once actually just said that to me in a moment of being quite peeved about something. She said, The difference between me and you is that God has cursed me and He's blessed you. And I thought, given the facts of life, that's correct. That's what she's feeling. And my life has just been so completely different. Now that I'm at the end of my ministry, there's just gratitude. I really have no regret that I want to call a regret. I think one of the things, and it comes back to what I think the elder son has lacked, is when Paul tells Timothy that contentment with godliness is great gain. That's one of the phrases that affected me early as a Christian and early as a minister. That if I practiced those two things, godliness, not so great, but contentment with what I have, the gain would not be in reward, but there would be great gain, an enormous pleasure, enormous satisfaction, and gratitude. So I'm going to tell you, when I think of the older son, just bear with me for a moment. When I think of the older son, I think of the prostitutes in and near our church, and who come to our Christmas to be fed, and especially to our Christmas meal to be seated and treated as guests and so on. And I've tried to say this to Bellville, I'm attracted to them, but I'm terrified by them. So I'm attracted to, how do you cope? How do you live? How did you get to where you are? What was? But I don't want to get too close because I think I'm not sure I want to know. I'm not sure, and I feel with the elder brother. I wish I could understand what it feels like to be this older brother, but I do not want to end up being that aloof figure on the platform, not wanting to get my hands dirty, covered in glory of wealth and position and self-righteousness. I don't want that ever.
Wow. Yeah. So the tax collectors and the sinners, personified by the older brother. No, personified by the younger brother. The Pharisees and the scribes, personified by the older brother. The contrast between a group of people who have failed and have nowhere to hide the failure, who are eager for forgiveness, desperate for love. I can think of so many stories, of this. But on the other hand, a group of people who have no idea of their own sin, no concept that they have strayed, and are rather demanding. And he writes in here something that has hit me right between the eyes every time I preach about this passage. He says, bitterness is the sickness of the saints. And it's almost like there is a disease in church people, and I include myself because I'm sure I told you that I went to Goodwood Presbyterian Church to preach in November 2018, and the minister, Colin Campbell, showed me my name in the baptismal register in the August of 1973. And I cried because I thought that is when I became a member of this family. So I am a church person. And because this thing is so virulent, worse than COVID-19, I suffer from bitterness too. And when I sometimes hear a sermon from a fiery, preacher who, we mentioned it last week, who was involved in drugs and sex and rock and roll, and now is, second only to Jesus in terms of holiness, I get irritable. And I think, what the heck are you talking about? You don't know what you're talking about. And that is the older son talking, because I'm suffering from bitterness, which is a sickness of the saints. Have you found in your ministry that this is our disease?
Yes, I want to protect myself and say very little in me, because I genuinely feel very little of that, and very little envy of others. The things I envy on, they're not great, and then certainly turn me into bitterness. But I was affected by Jim Struthers, a Scots engineer in our congregation who died in his mid-90s, wonderful man. and he knew Shakespeare and his Bible and hymnals terrifyingly well and could quote it. And at some service in trying to talk about Thanksgiving, he said to me, "You need to go and look at King Lear, Act 1, line 4." And I thought, okay, what is this about? And of course, it's this phrase: "Sharper than the serpent's tooth is to have a thankless child."
True.
I still get moved, George. I still get moved that somebody could absolutely describe so profoundly, painfully, and accurately what it is like to have a thankless child. Now,
Sure.
I don't have thankless children. I've had children who irritated me when they were little and didn't say thank you, but I don't have that. And I don't know what it must feel like to be trapped in a relationship where your kids don't thank you. But God is trapped in that all the time. And yet he just continues to love and continues to bless and continues to show grace. So for me, I've got to root out bitterness and replace it with thankfulness every chance I get.
Yes.
It's a serpent's tooth.
Yeah, I just think over the years there have been moments where I felt myself at the receiving end of very demanding behavior, of not criticism but complaining, and I've had to remind myself that same sickness is in me. In order for me to handle it in a pastoral, in an appropriate way. And I've kind of settled on being firm but kind, so that if that bitterness is expressed by members of Christ's body in an inappropriate way, I try to say, no, I'm not going to do that. I won't, I'll be manipulated by that sort of thing. But to do it in a kind way, to do it in a way that allows a space for a relationship to take shape,
Well, that's Christ in you, and that's a great pastor that's talking that does that. It does affect me deeply, the level of ingratitude in the saints, and if that's the other side of the coin of bitterness, then I certainly accept what Nouwen is saying here. Yeah.
Okay.
Older son's face.
I want to make one last step before we conclude today's conversation, and maybe this step is a step towards next week's chat, because what Henri finishes up with in this section on the elder son is to remind his readers, you and I, that the father is the one who loves equally but individually. Now, that's maybe a funny way of putting it, because he doesn't say it exactly like that. But I can tell you something from years and years ago, when I started out in the ministry, and I was in my very first year in Margate on the Natal South Coast, and I was doing a Bible study on the Prodigal Son. And I had a lady in the congregation who, and an elder, and she was very much involved and so on. And we got to this older son, and of course, many of the people in the Bible study wanted to talk about why the older son was not justified in his irritation towards the younger son, and people said, the fact is, the younger son has got away with a lot, and so on. And at the end of this, Anne Grant said, my mother seemingly loved my brother so much more than she loved me. And I confronted her about it one time. And she said to me, it's not that I love him more. It's just that I think he needs me more. Now, you can rationalize that away, I guess, and it can be pretty painful to hear, but it was for her a redeeming moment, because she realized that it was absolutely true, that the quality and the quantity of the love was the same, but the love was slightly more directed, or directed in a different way when it came to her brother, because truth be told, he did need her, the mother, more than Anne need it. And so it's helped me to understand this business of how God loves. He loved the younger son and he loved the older son. He may have loved them differently, but the quality and the quantity of his love was the same. Does that make any sense?
It certainly makes sense to me. And I can hear a mother or a father saying that this one does need more. I want to tell you another story, though, about the equalness of God's love for all his children. Again, Kingsley Dale, great mates. He gets married. We're happy. He has his first child. It's absolutely marvelous. And then Jessie falls pregnant with the second child. And Kingsley tells me, I'm terrified, Rod, that I'm not going to love the second child as much as I love Heather. I don't know, in those days, you didn't know whether you're going to get a boy or a girl, so you had no idea. But there was deep anxiety in him that he would actually not have enough love to share. That it would just be a limited thing.
Yes.
And his mother-in-law, Pat, said to him, Kingsley, you'll discover it just multiplies. So come the birth of the second child, who happens to be a son, and I see Kingsley a few hours after the birth, the sort of morning after. I can't remember when Jonathan was actually born, but it's in East London, and I go to the manse to see Kingsley, and he literally comes running out of the house, and we embrace. And he was not a hugger, and we kiss each other cheek to cheek, as he was definitely not Greek, but the most profound kiss on cheek to cheek, and tears running down his face, and he says, I love that boy. I love that boy. And I think he's discovered this multiplication. Jonathan had done nothing but breathe. He's just been there a couple of hours.
Right.
But there was this profound discovery in Kingsley of the love of God poured into our hearts by the Holy Spirit. And that has lived with me as a picture of the unquestionable love of God for all of us equally, but individually.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the sadness to me is that although that we discover that to be true, time and time again, and I'm not just talking, you learn the thing and then it's all over. You have to learn this thing over and over again. You think that when God blesses someone, implicit in that is a rejection of you, because you haven't got that thing, or you didn't get blessed in that way, or your experience is not such, or there's a little bit of suffering that you're having to deal with, where when you look at the others, they don't seem to have it at all. So this notion of comparison it's very difficult to get over, isn't it?
Well, you will remember Peter being told by Jesus, when you're old, you will be led where you do not want to go. And his immediate reaction is not, what does that mean? But he looks at John and says, what about him?
Yes.
And that comparison is in our lives. It's there all the time. If you're going to tell me your perfect love for me is going to make me go where I don't want to go, well, what the hell? What's happening to them? I wanted to be at least as bad, if not worse.
Yes. And then Jesus has to say, never mind him, you follow me.
Yes, that's what's so beautiful. I want you.
We serve a God who does not compare. And that's very, very helpful. I guess in this COVID-19, lockdown situation, we often, I think I went through a stage where I was doing a bit of comparing, is our service good enough? Is the video clip okay? Is it going to be all right? When they see all the, when people watch the television channels on DSTV of the church services overseas, this thing pales into insignificance. It's so pathetic. And it has no, we don't have fancy machinery. And
I understand this.
So this comparison, but I think there came a moment where, either through arrogance or, I don't know, maybe just silliness, I thought, this is just nonsense. We'll do what we do. There's no comparison.
Authentic worship is only what you can offer. That's what makes it authentic.
Yes. Yes.
Certainly, yeah.
So in this last little section, Henri Nouwen is quoting Arthur Freeman. I'm not sure, what the background of Arthur Freeman is, but it's a lovely quote. He says, "The Father loves each son and gives each the freedom to be what he can. He cannot give them freedom that they will not take nor adequately understand.
Yeah.
The Father seems to realize, beyond the customs of his society, the need of his sons to be themselves, but he also knows their need for his love and a home. How their stories will be completed is up to them. The fact that the parable is not completed makes it certain that the Father's love is not dependent on an appropriate completion of the story. The Father's love is only dependent on himself and remains part of his character. As Shakespeare says in one of his sonnets, love is not love which alters when it alteration finds." So I really like that, because it helps me to understand that, what God is doing and who God is. I mean, it seems so silly when I say it, but it really needs to take root in me. Who God is not dependent on my response. I don't get to change God's behavior by being badly behaved.
Absolutely.
It's a beautiful, gracious thing, that, isn't it?
The parable of the guys in the vineyard getting all the same wage. Of course, the guys who are there longest think they're going to get more when the payment gets paid out in the way it is paid out. But actually, for people out of work, a day's wage is a pretty good day. And somehow we can't cope with the fact that because I think I have worked harder, therefore I deserve more, which is just the way of the world, just the way of the world. So I don't know what made me go and do this, but I went because of the sense of the story is not completed and I have no idea how it would be completed. Therefore, how will my life be completed? And somehow it made me go and see, how did C.S. Lewis think about himself in some ways as this university don coming to Christ? And you will know the quote because it's pretty famous, but he talks about the Holy Spirit helped me see myself in need of God, because what I found in myself appalled me. A zoo of lusts, a bedlam of ambitions, a nursery of fears, a harem of fondled hatreds. My name was Legion.
Goodness.
But he loved me. Sure, I think I don't want to, both older and younger son, both Rod and George, are suddenly in that place of saying, if it was not for his grace, if that light was not shining on face and hands, where would we be?
Where would we be? Quite
beautiful.
Lastly, I am his beloved when I've got myself twisted up thinking he loves others more. The only thing we can cleave to, and this is the beautiful refrain in this book that Henri Nouwen writes, is that, and he whips something out of Matthew 4, out of the baptism experience, and he puts that onto all of us. It's something that God the Father said of Jesus. He says that's what God says of us. I am his beloved, the one in whom he's well pleased. That is the content of what the still small voice says every time he speaks about me. And it's helped me over the years also in discernment. If somebody says something which they want me to know, or it could be a criticism, or it could even be a slight or whatever, I ask myself, does this accord with I am his beloved, the one in whom he is well pleased?
Very good.
Because if it does, then I must take it very seriously. But if it's discordant, then I've got to treat it with suspicion. Not because I'm arrogant, but because that's what he says about me, and that's the greatest truth, not so.
Yeah. And you pointed out the subtle difference between the echo of the Spirit convicting you and you know this is right, this is good. It's hard, but I can deal with it because it comes from love, and the condemnation from the evil one. That in the end, you know, there's only one thing that you want, just to pull me down because you don't love me. And it's just lovely to know I am His beloved. Yeah.
Well, thank you again. It's
thanks,
the time just flows away. It just goes so quickly, and I've thoroughly enjoyed myself as always. I'm just a little anxious and apprehensive, and sad in advance that next time when we have a conversation will be the last one on this topic, because we're going to handle really something that I think is a bit of a twist in the tail. I really didn't see it coming, and we'll talk next week. But my little Reformed heart, my little Presbyterian self-understanding really battled. Took a long time for this to take root in me.
The kingdom's a bit bigger than us, eh?
Just a bit.
I sort of want to make one little self-conscious comment.
Right.
I got to chew chewing gum all the time because I don't produce enough saliva. And I must tell you, when I went back to watch our first one of this, I thought, oh my heavens, that looks so ugly. I'm sorry, that's just too bad. I've got to be gum chewer.
That's all right.
Love you, George. This has been so